This is DW News live from Berlin. Tonight, the new German Chancellor makes a first visit to the White House to reassure a worried Washington. Chancellor Olaf Scholz arrived at the U.S. Capitol to deliver a message to President Joe Biden that the U.S. and Germany are on the same page in this crisis. We'll bring you coverage of their joint press conference live this hour. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron is in Moscow for talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Macron is aiming to find common ground and to end fears of a Russian invasion of Ukraine. And that as DW News visits a frontline town in Ukraine where residents who've witnessed war before are trying to keep hopes of peace alive. I'm Brent Goff. It's good to have you with us on this very busy Monday. We begin with the U.S. and Germany, the crisis over Ukraine, and a crisis of trust. Today, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz met with U.S. President Joe Biden at the White House. This was Scholz's first trip to Washington since taking office back in December, a confidence-building visit aimed at convincing the U.S. that in the face of Russian aggression, Germany remains a reliable partner. Before meeting Biden, Scholz reiterated that military aggression against Ukraine would have a high cost for Russia, but Germany's NATO allies, and that includes the U.S., are unhappy with Berlin's refusal to provide Ukraine with weapons. Scholz stressing that Germany would coordinate its response to the crisis with its allies.
We are close allies and will act in a very coordinated manner to master the current crises. First and foremost, we have to deal with the tensions resulting from the Russian troop buildup along the Ukrainian border. That's why it's important that Germany, the US, NATO and the European Union are in agreement. There will be a very high cost to a military attack on Ukraine.
And we've got team coverage here of this important meeting in Washington. Joining me here at the big table is our chief political correspondent, Michaela Kufner, and our correspondent, Oliver Salet, is in Washington. Oliver, let me start with you. President Biden is saying that we're working in lockstep to further deter Russian aggression in Europe. So what are the chances that Biden and Scholz will find a joint solution to approach this crisis?
Well, first of all, Brent, there is a lot of pressure on Olaf Scholz's first visit here as sitting chancellor in Washington, D.C., and certainly also high expectations here in the White House. There are two core diplomatic issues that we're looking at right now. And number one is, of course, that military support for Ukraine, and Germany here is reluctant to deliver weapons. It has been historically reluctant to deliver weapons to crisis-prone areas. And then number two is that German reluctance, again, to give up Nord Stream 2, the gas pipeline from Russia that was just finished but has never operated so far. Both sides have emphasized their close partnership. As we've just heard, we have not heard anything substantial coming out there from the White House. The expectation is that Olaf Scholz delivers something specific with regards to Nord Stream 2. Perhaps we're going to hear more of that in the press conference in a little while.
Michaela, you know, the White House has been saying now for weeks that Russia could attack Ukraine any day now. And they even were using for a while the word imminent to describe this attack. We haven't been hearing that, though, from the German government. What is the German government's assessment of this threat?
Well, first of all, it does also receive that same intelligence from its transatlantic partner. At the same time, what the German government here is emphasizing, that any talk of imminent conflict could bring about exactly that. And that's why we're seeing an emphasis by Olaf Scholz on diplomatic talks ahead of traveling to the United States. He stressed that the fact that talks are continuing again, that it's back to the level of talking, is a success in itself. But as just mapped out there are some sticking points, whereas the United States have described the Nord Stream 2 pipeline as leverage that Europe has. Olaf Scholz keeps stressing that everything would be on the table if there was an infringement, a new infringement, I must say, because after all, Russia already annexated the Crimea Peninsula. That would mean that everything is on the table, but he simply cannot bring himself to say that that direct pipeline linking Russia to Germany would be in question. He says it implicitly, but he won't spell it out, and it would be very interesting whether he does it here.
You know, here in Germany, Olaf Scholz is being criticized for being the invisible chancellor. He's now in Washington, where you've got members of both parties in the U.S. Congress saying, you know, Merkel's gone. Can we trust this new German government? Do we have a new Germany here? Is there a trust deficit right now? Is he going there to fix something that maybe he did not break?
Well, he certainly came in to power on that very ticket of German stability, Merkel-esque stability style. Now we're all learning that that is clearly a political brand that Angela Merkel really intrinsically had for herself. And quite clearly, we are seeing Vladimir Putin testing whether it outlives Angela Merkel's time in office. And this is what he is up against at this moment. So what he sees as a steady hand kind of German stability, diplomacy, not rocking the boat with Russia, something also Angela Merkel was very reluctant to do in the past, although she organised sanctions against Russia in 2014. That is being interpreted as not really very much a reliable partner this side, but it's also something that he himself says simply isn't true. He says that relations with the United States are excellent, particularly at working level. Both sides see eye to eye. So let's see how that pans out today.
And Oliver, we know that before the Chancellor left for Washington, he was warned, if you will, I'll use the word warned, by the German ambassador in Washington that, you know, when you arrive in Washington, you're going to face a climate where a lot of people are asking, is Germany still a reliable partner? Talk to me about what you're hearing on that side of the Atlantic about this.
Yeah, that's a cable you're mentioning that German Ambassador Emily Haber sent to Berlin. You know, Brent, you don't need a lot of intelligence and a lot of secret information to see that. The newspapers are full of it. There's a lot of talk on the national TV networks here. And on the street, of course, of an unreliable German partner. And in part, that's correct historically, though, and we have to look at history when it comes to weapon deliveries here from Germany. Germany has always been reluctant to deliver weapons to crisis areas, and therefore, of course, the U.S. Administration is and cannot be surprised about that part of the story. When it comes to Nord Stream 2, of course, the expectations are a bit more justified, and of course, there the expectation is that Germany would distance itself from that pipeline should Russia invade Ukraine. But as you've just mentioned, and as Michaela especially has talked about, Germany is one of America's closest allies, and Joe Biden said that today as well.
All right, Oliver Salla in Washington and our chief political correspondent, Michaela Kuffner, here at the big table. To both of you, thank you. Well, this week of urgent diplomacy, it kicked off earlier today with French President Emmanuel Macron visiting Russian President Vladimir Putin. During the meeting, Macron said that he hopes the talks in Moscow will start to build more trust between the European Union and Russia and avoid war. Putin praised Macron's efforts to resolve this crisis. The world is watching this meeting and other diplomatic efforts while more than 100,000 Russian troops remain positioned near the Russian-Ukrainian border. All right, let's go now to our chief international editor, Richard Walker, for some context on what we're seeing here. We've got a lot of high-level diplomacy going on right now, Richard, on all fronts. Where does the French president, where does he fit into all of this?
Yeah, it's really interesting to watch, isn't it, Brent? Also in the context of what we've just been talking about there, about Olaf Scholz in Washington. Now you have the French President Emmanuel Macron in Moscow, and this is being interpreted, I think, as him claiming something of a leadership role within Europe now in dealing with this crisis. And that has a couple of reasons behind it. First of all, France is currently holding the rotating presidency of the European Union, so it's partly in that role that he is in Moscow right now. But also referring back to that discussion just now about Olaf Scholz, of course, the reality here in Germany is that Olaf Scholz is a new chancellor finding his feet, trying to fit into the very big shoes left behind by Angela Merkel, who was in office here for 16 years and really dominated the political stage here in Europe and had a lot of dealings, a lot of experience with Vladimir Putin. So Emmanuel Macron kind of claiming that kind of like first and foremost position in dealing with this great challenge of dealing with Russia. Plus, you have an election coming up very soon in France. So Macron probably hoping to improve his profile domestically by securing some kind of successes with Vladimir Putin. But of course, it carries also the risk that if he comes away with no such success, then it could come at some political cost to him.
And Richard, we know that NATO has firmly rejected any Russian demands that Ukraine will never be allowed to join the alliance. Knowing that Macron cannot offer that kind of promise to the Kremlin, what can then the French president really bring to the table to de-escalate the situation?
Yeah, well, it's a fascinating question, isn't it, Brent? And nobody's really sure of the answer to it. I mean, I think it can help sometimes to look at the situation that we have at the moment in the framework of sticks and carrots. And what we've just been hearing in Washington, a lot of the discussions at the moment are about the sticks, the deterrent measures that the West is trying to line up to deter Russia from taking military action against Ukraine. That's primarily in the form of sanctions. The tougher the sanctions, the greater the deterrent effect. The bigger the stick is the thinking. What Macron, I think, is emphasising here is a bit more the carrot side of the equation. Now, it's interesting to see with Emmanuel Macron, not just recently, but over a longer period of time, he's been the Western leader who seems most open to striking a kind of big, grand bargain with Russia, rethinking the security order that has existed in Europe since the end of the Cold War. Macron's analysis seems to be that Putin is simply not willing to tolerate this security order that has been dominated by NATO for all this time, wants something new. Now, if Macron is interested in pursuing that kind of direction of thinking, the concern among many European allies, particularly in Eastern Europe, is that that could mean concessions that could come at a threat to their security. So this kind of thinking that we're seeing from Macron certainly has a lot of European allies getting a little bit jumpy.
All right. Our Chief International Editor, Richard Walker. Richard, as always, thank you. Well, the German Foreign Minister, Annalena Baerbock, she has issued some strong warnings that a Russian invasion of Ukraine would trigger unprecedented sanctions. During a visit to Kyiv, Baerbock stressed the need, however, to avoid further escalation. Berlin has been criticized for its response to Russia's troop buildup on Ukraine's border. While other NATO countries have delivered weapons to Ukraine, the German government has ruled out such a move, instead sending helmets. Baerbock is scheduled to visit the front line between Ukrainian forces and Russian-backed separatists in the Donbass region on Tuesday. DW correspondent Matthias Behringer is covering this story for us from the region. He traveled to eastern Ukraine near areas controlled by Russian-backed separatists. He sent us this report.
The village school of Ranitne, the last village here on Ukrainian-controlled territory, is close to the front line. It has come under fire before. Now the classrooms are empty, not because of the war, but because of new COVID restrictions. The war is something people here have been living with for 8 years.
We go to work, and most of the time the children go to school. But we don't know what will happen in 5 or 10 minutes, or tomorrow night. We're always worried, always scared.
Just a few hundred meters down this road is the last Ukrainian position. This school is in the line of fire of the opposite side. There is a heavy military presence in Ranitne. A ceasefire is in place, but shelling can sometimes be heard at night.
We already know who shoots and when, so we just sit at home. It was worse a few years ago. We always hid in the cellar when there was fighting, but that was then.
But with the latest Russian buildup, a bigger escalation is on the table again.
When things calmed down, we bought a house here.
But now we don't know what will happen.
Ukrainian-controlled territory ends with the last houses of the village. Behind a small river lies a demilitarized strip. A pedestrian bridge is the only link to the next village in the so-called grey zone.
The next village is not small. People come here every day to work and kids go to school.
One of the people who crosses the border every day is teacher Lyudmila Tkachuk. She is from across the river and does not want to give her real name because her life depends on good relations with both sides. Shelling is even more frequent in her village.
My work is here. I come here every day. Yes, it's hard. Yes, it's dangerous, very dangerous. But I cannot just quit work and leave. I just can't.
She says she has not yet lost hope that somehow this conflict might come to an end peacefully.
And DW's chief political editor, Michaela Kufter, she's back at the big table with me now. Let's talk about weapons for a moment here. In the past, Germany, even as a member of NATO, has been able to get out of being pushed into sending weapons anywhere. That doesn't seem to be the case in this crisis. You've got members of the U.S. Congress, you've got people in London saying Germany should walk the walk with us. But that's not what is happening, is it?
No, that's something that Germany is categorically ruling out, although it did in the past arm the Peshmerga. So there are exceptions to the delivery of weapons into a conflict region, but it is now sticking by this principle, and it almost feels like there's a different currency Germany has in terms of approaching this diplomatically to the United States that simply doesn't seem to convert. Because what Germany has announced today is that it will strengthen its battle group in Lithuania and send an extra 350 soldiers. It leads that NATO battle group. It actually has a very large engagement within NATO, the largest one currently active. At the same time, it's getting the bad press. And that's simply because the numbers are also so different. The United States has sent 2,000 extra soldiers to Europe over this standoff, essentially, with Russia in Ukraine. Germany is the largest donor for Ukraine. Almost 2 billion euros have been spent since 2014. It is building infrastructure there. But at the same time, when it comes down to it, people want to see action. The United States and its senators, because after all, Joe Biden is also under pressure himself domestically to really get his allies to take on more responsibility. And that is exactly what Olaf Scholz will have to explain today.
And Scholz is also under pressure, though, because all the polls show that a majority of Germans are not in favor of sending weapons to Ukraine.
That is true, and that is historically because of Germany's very dark past. It is the public is adamantly against weapons exports, which actually sees the government on the defensive on this pretty much every year when the latest report comes out. Particularly the delivery of arms into sensitive regions like the Middle East, like Egypt, for instance. So also a very fine line to tread domestically. At the same time, Olaf Scholz has a bigger issue here because the hashtag in recent weeks was, where is Olaf Scholz? Wo ist Olaf Scholz here in Germany? Because he spoke very little publicly, particularly about this conflict, and because he's also very evasive in interviews. He clearly has an agenda, what he wants to say and what he doesn't want to say. And he does not want to talk about Nord Stream. He does not want to talk about his inner party feelings with the Social Democrats, who are seen as much more Russia-friendly, much more open to Russia than many other members of his three-party coalition, particularly the Greens, feel comfortable with.
Yeah. And we want to just let our viewers know, if you're just joining us right now, we are waiting for this joint press conference to begin at the White House. You see there's a live shot right there from inside the White House. We're going to bring that to you when it begins. We're expecting it to begin any moment now. And Michaela, while we're watching and waiting, let's talk about the invisible Chancellor, Olaf Scholz. He's been accused of, since taking power in December, of kind of being missing in action, particularly in this crisis. And it's gotten him into trouble, or at least a lot of criticism here in Germany, but it's not helping him in the United States either, is it?
No, it absolutely isn't, because at the same time, he is also in the United States, but overall wants to show that there is not an inch between any of the NATO allies, that NATO is completely united on this. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, he is leaving some room for manoeuvre to interpret particularly what he says on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, mm-hmm. because it is also something that was launched by a former Social Democrat Chancellor, Gerhard Schröder. So there's a party legacy to this, which ruffles feathers within his own party. So he doesn't seem to really be free from this kind of interpretation of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, not just as strategic leverage, but almost a lifeline to Russia to continue dialogue, with many parts of his party stressing that there needs to be a way to find cohabitation with Russia, not a tough line on Russia. And that's exactly what the United States and other NATO allies, particularly also the Baltics, or ask Poland, are calling for at this moment in time, because they are very much afraid.
And, you know, you wish you could be a wall, or a fly on the wall in this face-to-face meeting inside the Oval Office between the Chancellor and the U.S. President. I've been reading a lot of commentary that says Scholz has to convince the President that Germany's commitment to NATO, commitment to the transatlantic relationship, is as steadfast and as firm as ever. Give me your take on his ability to do that.
If the working relations are as good as his government claims, that probably isn't that difficult. What he lacks is a sense of making an announcement where he wants to take Germany's line on this and where he wants to define leadership. Let's just contrast Emmanuel Macron and him actually within the last 24 hours. Emmanuel Macron heads to Moscow and says he's seeking some kind of historic moment with Vladimir Putin to resolve this. Mm-hmm. While there, he recognizes that there is an issue. Clearly, he maps out that the balance of security is an issue that needs to be discussed. Now, really, that's not exactly the NATO line right now, but it opens space for dialogue at the same time. He gets a lot of praise from Putin. Then we have Olaf Scholz travelling the other way, being on the defensive when sitting down in front of the fire in the Oval Office, to really show that kind of unity. So you have Olaf Scholz on the defensive, and you have someone who's perceived as in the lead on this, Emmanuel Macron, promising a historic outcome. Whether that actually happens is quite something else, yeah. But it's someone claiming where they want to be. And just an illustration what the German government is not doing, while it is financing the power supply, the power network, particularly with a view on renewables in Ukraine, it is not announcing an aim to connect Ukraine to the European power grid, nor is the EU defining a common line on that. That is something very technical, but it would be strategic at the same time. That is something that is completely out of the scale of delivering weapons. It's something very peaceful, but it's a declaration, a goal that is not being defined right now.
Well, inside the Oval Office, if the U.S. President says to Chancellor Scholz, you guys, have to get on board 100%, can't Scholz say, well, we are, but we're walking a fine line here. A quarter of our natural gas comes right now from Russia. So let's say we turn the taps off and we're going to be hit hard. The United States, it doesn't have to worry about that. I mean, so Germany does have economic interests to worry about, unprecedented economic shocks that would take place that the United States does not have to worry about.
That's true, but on the other hand, that's also an economic opportunity for the United States, who wanted to see Germany build more LNG terminals for a very long time. It has one at the moment that's actually working, so that the United States can export gas to Germany and Europe via Germany. So there are different aspects to this. What Olaf Scholz's stress is that while Germany may not be delivering weapons, it is also taking a military lead elsewhere in the Baltic states. Now, later this week, he will meet with Baltic leaders. Mm-hmm. Germany has just announced that it will bolster its presence there, that leads a battle group in the region. So while Germany shies away from a direct confrontation with Russia by supplying Ukraine with German weapons, which could see German weapons face off Russian soldiers on the other side, which historically is unbearable for a German government right now, I dare say for a German public. Now, the counter-argument why Ukraine has requested weapons is, well, Germany was also on the other side and committed atrocities in Ukraine. Where's the historic responsibility there? So Germany decides to keep out of this argument completely while trying to demonstrate maximum solidarity with its NATO partners, just doing that elsewhere, just doing that in the Baltics to a certain degree. And within NATO territory, that's very important.
We want to remind our viewers, too, that we're looking at a live picture from inside the White House. We are expecting this joint press conference between the U.S. President and the German Chancellor to begin any moment now. And it looks like it says they're getting ready for that to happen. And let me ask you, Michaela, while we're let's keep this picture up if you could, because I think they're going to start any moment now. Why can't Chancellor Scholz, though, go inside the Oval Office and say, you know, let's acknowledge Ukraine's sovereignty, but at the same time, let's acknowledge Russia's national security interests. And why can't we say there'll be a moratorium or a freeze on any type of expansion for a certain amount of time? Why is that not on the table?
Well, the simple answer is that Russia had already signed off on allowing NATO to expand and signed off on every country to determine its own future. So if Ukraine decided to want to do that, it should be able to. So why should NATO give up on a principle? At the same time, Ukraine couldn't join NATO at this point in time anyway, because there's an active conflict on its territory. So it's not possible. That is something that Russia has effectively blocked already. I think it's worth listening out to what Vladimir Putin keeps saying. He actually said to Emmanuel Macron today that he wants to solve the crisis related to providing equal security in Europe for a serious historical perspective. Now, equal security, that definition is quite something else for Vladimir Putin than it is for NATO and the European Union and the United States right now, despite the fact that this is something that already had been sealed. It had been agreed by both sides. So here we see a Russian president wanting to redefine what he describes the balance. He sees an imbalance. That is not the perception of NATO at all. So how do you bridge that gap? And here in the German debate, we often talk about a Drohkulisse. Maybe you can translate it for me. It's like it's a threat.
A pretext. What do you mean? Like a pretext for?
It's a backdrop of a threat, but it's not the real threat. It's not the real thing, okay? It's something used in theatre or used in the movies to a kind of pretense strength. That clearly is not enough to deal with Vladimir Putin right now. And now you're seeing as the United States, NATO play hardball, and clearly we saw Emmanuel Macron open a bit of space for manoeuvre today. And I think it'll be very interesting what comes out of that. He will actually debrief his partners afterwards what that line is, and we can only guess from the outside right now.
I'm wondering, too, how China fits into this. We saw this display of almost a bromance between the Chinese president, the Russian president on the eve of the Winter Olympics. And how does that apply then to Biden and Scholz? You know, when they're sitting down, they can each say, you know, our respective economies are incredibly interlinked with the Chinese economy now. So does that put them more in the same boat in dealing with Russia? Or does that, do the Germans feel like they're being forced even more now to choose not only to be against Russia, but also maybe eventually to be against China as well?
Well, this is a question that Angela Merkel avoided rather successfully for 1.5 decades. And that is something that Olaf Scholz is confronted with right now. What we've seen at the Winter Olympics is Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping clearly agreeing that NATO was a threat. Getting the Chinese to publicly agree on this is quite something. Now, their interests are more in the South China Sea than in Europe. But of course, China is watching very closely at whether Russia manages to weaken the European Union and particularly manages to weaken the strength and the NATO countries sticking together. I think an interesting question is whether Russia really will get a better geostrategic deal if it teams up with China for now and then discovers that China may have interests that don't really tail in with Russia's interests in the middle or long run. But that's quite a different question right now. Right now, they are both teaming up, and Germany particularly is firmly sitting between the chairs because it has very large economic interests with China, quite clearly, which do not tail with the United States. It was very interesting that Olaf Scholz actually named this when he spoke to the World Economic Forum, and he said that Europe would have to also find its own interests that don't between China and the United States, something Angela Merkel would never have said because she did not want to go there politically. But of course, China knows full well that Germany will be reluctant or simply won't join its very firm stance towards China, because of the overarching economic interests for now.
For now. The U.S. has a diplomatic boycott of the Olympics in Beijing. Germany does not.
No, but no officials went. So
it's kind of like a boycott. But how do you explain that?
Well, this was politicized by the United States.
Yeah.
The United States chose to make this a political issue rather than just not sending anybody, which would have also been fine. And Germany, and along with it, several other countries decided not to join a boycott, but to simply not send anybody, which is seen as milder diplomacy. But I think that is quite a good example to illustrate the difference in attitude, that the world's #1 country feels challenged by China, the second largest economy at this moment in time, which wants to become the largest.
Yeah.
That's where we are. And Europe, Germany is right in the middle of that.
Let me bring us back to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline issue. The German Chancellor Angela Merkel, she was able to get President Joe Biden to reverse his opposition to this. You know, he had been against it for a long time. There's bipartisan opposition to it. But then they met and he agreed, okay, I won't slap any sanctions on any German companies involved as long as we don't see Putin using energy as a weapon. That's the Merkel legacy, and that we're seeing right now.
Here's the two different translations of this.
Sure.
The translation on the record by Joe Biden right now is that if Russia sets another foot at this new potential front line into Ukraine, Nord Stream 2 will not go online. That translates into Scholz German as, if Russia does that, everything will be on the table. And that's in a nutshell where they are both saying the same, but they're not quite saying the same, are they?
No, they're not.
But they're saying the same, though, aren't they?
Well,
he just can't bring himself to spell that out. And also, what is being stressed on the German side is that, look, we have agreed on a very extensive list of sanctions, but we won't tell you, journalists, that's the argument, because that would weaken our position. But we are willing to take a very heavy economic toll, and that would include the SWIFT payment system, which would hurt Europe badly as well.
Let's just remind our viewers, we are looking at a live picture now inside the White House. There are people moving in. We expect a joint press conference between the U.S. President and the German Chancellor to begin any moment now. And the fact that there is movement...
When the officials come, it's not far off.
Going to start.
That's the chief economic... security advisor there of Olaf Scholz, just taking a seat on the left-hand side.
They're about 15 minutes late.
So that means they're about to come.
They're about to. Before Scholz left for Washington yesterday, he gave an interview to German television. He was asked multiple times about Vladimir Putin. He did not allow the words Vladimir Putin to cross his lips once. How do you explain that, Michaela?
Well, what we're hearing from the German side is that there is a European diplomatic drive, and I think he does not want to endanger that. So Emmanuel Macron, sitting there in Moscow today, is doing that on a European ticket because his country holds the EU presidency. Also, Emmanuel Macron is facing elections in April, and it certainly is in Germany's interests to see him remain where he is right now. So it may well also be in part that Olaf Scholz is quite happy for him to have that dialogue, for all eyes to be on him meeting Vladimir Putin today, to get some of the glory and not really deflect from that by making statements about Vladimir Putin, which is something that's also perceived as being very tricky, that can cause all sorts of diplomatic issues that would then have to be discussed later when he meets him next week. He's going to Ukraine on Monday, and then he's going to Moscow on Tuesday.
And we're seeing more movement in there. We know that the U.S. president, he's known for always being slightly late with these press conferences. So we're still in the, the range here of time that is to be expected for this White House. What should be the first question that Chancellor Scholz should be asked?
He should be asked, is Nord Stream 2 dead if Russia sets foot on Ukrainian soil? And then watch out for the answer. That would be a new statement to make, and this is certainly an audience, not the people necessarily sitting there, the German journalists on the left and the American journalists on the right.
Right.
But those hearing it that side, that's what they want to hear from him.
But what about if we're not talking about invasion, though, what about if all of a sudden, we've seen Russia do this before, that Russia just turns the pipelines off, turns the tap off for natural gas? Isn't that using energy as a weapon? Isn't that a criteria for killing Nord Stream 2?
Well, this is within the realm of politics to then decide how they want to see it. This will never be in a court of law that rules this. It will always be measured against various strategic interests. But the strategic interest of the United States and actually many EU partners is for this pipeline not to go online. It also was a strategic interest of the German Foreign Minister, Annalena Baerbock from the Greens, until she became part of the coalition that now stands in for this project, unless it violates the agreement that Angela Merkel struck with the United States.
Do we know where the Chancellor stands on this notion of there being a continued, alliance with the U.S. and Europe, but for Europe to stand more independently when it comes to foreign policy? We know that that's what we're hearing from the French president. But again, we've got kind of the silent Scholz treatment on that.
Yes, but this was the striking new tone when he spoke at the World Economic Forum. It was the first time that he didn't simply stress that the United States are the closest ally outside the EU. That is what he does stress time and time again. But it was the first time that he actually, on the record, spelled out the conflict of interest that there clearly is in standing at America's side on everything and at the same time having close economic ties with China and not being able to afford, quite literally, siding 100% with the United States when it comes...
Can you have your alliance cake and eat it too?
At the moment, to a certain degree, Germany can. How this tails in with a more sovereign Europe, and this is something Olaf Scholz stressed when he came into office, that he wants a more sovereign Europe that sounds very much Emmanuel Macron, that is able to define its own interests, which sounds so obvious, but it's something that Europe, the EU, simply often isn't able to do, particularly in foreign policy terms, because you need unanimity on that. And that is very difficult to get, particularly with eastern states, Hungary often having a very different line, also on Russia and China. So this is something he wants to work very hard for. The thing is, he simply does not have the time. He is on day 62, I checked today, of being Chancellor.
He's had no honeymoon.
He is not getting his 100 days grace period. It is simply not happening. He came, and this is the second crisis. I mean, what hit him on day one and before was the pandemic here in Germany,
Right,
and
which is not
Omicron
over, yeah.
hitting him. So we haven't mentioned that today
Yeah.
for understandable reasons. We could take a break from that for a really short time, despite a new spike here in Germany.
But you know, this changing global order, though, Michaela, you know, Barack Obama came into office, and Merkel the former chancellor had to deal with an America that wanted to pivot to Asia. Remember that? And then we had former U.S. President Trump come in, who had a very belligerent tone and attitude towards NATO and the transatlantic relationship. And now you've got Biden, who came in, who talked about we're being at an inflection point in history because of what's happening with China right now. It's democracies against autocracies. And we're sitting here talking about something that sounds very Cold War-esque, you know, the West against Russia.
Well, I'm sure that Oliver, sitting in DC, will also have something to say about this, that maybe the tone has changed drastically, but the underpinning policy of demanding more from your NATO partners and demanding more leadership out of Europe, and actually demanding Europe and Germany to stand on what the US feels is the right side of history, which is with them when it comes to China. That has not changed significantly.
But there was this fear that this pivot to Asia was going to mean that Europe was almost going to be forgotten, that Europe was going to be this diplomatic museum. And that obviously has not happened now with this crisis. All right, let's go back inside the White House, Michaela. It looks like we've got the President and the Chancellor coming in.
Oh, thank you.
Let's take a listen.
Here we go.
Good afternoon. I'd like to start by thanking Chancellor Scholz for making this visit to Washington. We had an opportunity to have a very productive meeting. I think our staffs wondered whether we were going to let them in at all. We spent the first half hour more talking together, and it's been a very, very useful meeting. One of the things that struck me was the shared values and that shape how each of us approaches leadership. Among them, the foundational commitment to the dignity of workers and the need to treat all people with respect. So I enjoyed speaking with you, Olaf, and I know working together will continue to strengthen and deepen our alliance and the extensive partnership between Germany and the United States. Of course, at the top of our agenda today was our united approach to deterring Russia's threats against Ukraine and the long-standing principles of rule-based international order. That's what we spent most of our time talking about. Germany and the United States, together with our allies and partners, are working closely together to pursue diplomatic resolutions of this situation. And diplomacy is the very best way forward for all sides, we both agree, including best for Russia, in our view. And we have made it very clear we're ready to continue talks in good faith with Russia. Germany has also been a leader in pushing de-escalation of tensions and encouraging dialogue through the Normandy format. But if Russia makes a choice to further invade Ukraine, we are jointly ready, and all of NATO is ready. Today, the Chancellor and I discussed our close cooperation and developed a strong package of sanctions that are going to clearly demonstrate international resolve and impose swift and severe consequences if Russia violates Ukraine's sovereignty and its territorial integrity. And I want to thank Germany and all of our other partners in Eastern Europe, in the European Union, for their work in this united effort. We are in agreement that it cannot be business as usual if Russia further invades. We also discussed our shared commitment to NATO's Article 5 responsibilities and reassurance of our eastern flank allies. We're united in that as well. Already, the United States is sending troops to reinforce the alliance, and I want to thank the Chancellor of Germany for hosting additional U.S. forces and for the long-standing hospitality to our women and men in uniform. We also discussed the challenges we're facing to the international order from China, along with Russia and other competitors that are pursuing more illiberal futures. We've agreed that Germany and the United States will continue to work together to ensure that the rules and principles governing emerging technologies are geared to advance freedom of opportunity, not repression or authoritarianism. We also reaffirmed our commitment to completing the work of integrating the Western Balkans into the European institutions and to finally realize a Europe that is whole, free, and at peace. With Germany holding the presidency of the G7, we also talked about how that forum can harness the world's leading democracies to advance a robust agenda on global challenges, from ending the pandemic to addressing climate change. So the bottom line is this: whether as allies in NATO, partners through the European Union, as leaders of the G7, the G20, or through our strong bilateral relationship, Germany and the United States are close friends and reliable partners, and we can count on one another. There is no issue of global importance where Germany and the United States are not working together, strength to strength, and applying and amplifying our efforts together. So I want to thank you all for making the journey today, and I look forward to being the first of many opportunities we can spend together, beginning this meeting and throughout the rest of the year and the rest of our terms. So thank you and welcome. The floor is yours, sir.
Schönen Dank.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon from my side as well. I'm very grateful that we had the opportunity to talk in much detail today, and that I was able to make my first official visit here, and that we also could talk about the important questions that we're dealing with today. We are in a very difficult situation, and it is a good thing that Joe and I were able to discuss what we need to do in this difficult context. Of course, there is a military threat in Ukraine, against Ukraine. We cannot remain silent on that. We see the number of Russian troops along the Ukrainian border, and that is a serious threat to European security. And this is why it is important that we act together, that we stand together, and that we do what is necessary together. It is important that all allies, the US and Germany, the transatlantic partnership between the US and Europe, NATO, say the same thing, speak with one voice, and do things together. And we made it very clear, if there was a military aggression against Ukraine, this will entail severe consequences that we agreed upon together, severe sanctions that we have worked on together. So there will be a high price for Russia. This is a very clear message. Everybody has understood it, and I think this message has been made clear again and again, so that even Russia has understood the message now. What is important is that we also intensively worked on preparing possible sanctions together. We don't want to start once there is a military aggression against Ukraine. We have prepared a reaction that will help us to react swiftly if needed, and we will do that. At the same time, it is important to use all diplomatic means we have, and I'm very glad about your great willingness to move forward together, especially the bilateral talks between the US and Russia. And of course, the talks that we have agreed upon within the NATO-Russia format. This is also important, also because Russia needs to understand that NATO stands together and that NATO is prepared. After so many years, there have not been any talks in this format, so it is a good sign that they are happening now. Of course, we have controversial debates there, but it is important that we talk. And the same is true for the OSCE, where we need to discuss about security in Europe. This is also a progress, as tiresome as it may be, and we have not yet reached any very substantial conclusions yet, but it is good to see that this format plays a role now. And the same is true for the talks between Ukraine, Russia, France and Germany, the Normandy format. We have this format, but we haven't been able to really use it in a productive way over the last few years. So now we have come back to that format. We are having tough discussions in that format, and that shows that there are ways that will lead us out of this difficult situation. And this dual-track approach of clear announcements with regard to sanctions that will be taken if there is a military aggression, and at the same time keeping all dialogue formats open, I think this is the most promising strategy one can have, and that is what we're doing together, and we stand side by side in this approach. We also talked about many other topics that are important for us today, especially when it comes to the G7 presidency of the Federal Republic of Germany. We will work closely as strong economies, strong democracies, and we also, therefore, have a special mandate to contribute to cohesion worldwide. And part of this is that we continue to do everything we can to make sure that the citizens of the world can be vaccinated, not only in our rich countries, but also in countries where people would love to have the vaccine but don't have access yet. And these are initiatives that we have carried out together and that are of utmost importance worldwide. The same is true for fighting man-made climate change, a big topic that keeps us all busy, even though it is obvious that only a global solution can be successful, because climate is a global thing. It doesn't stop at national borders. As an industrialized nation, we have an important contribution to make. We have technological opportunities, economic opportunities, and have to use them in order to prepare a situation where we and others can enjoy prosperity without harming the climate. This is the big challenge that we see, and that is of great importance to us. So this is why we want to work together on this strategy and use a climate club of like-minded people and partners. These are some of the topics we discussed, and once again, the personal discussion we had illustrates the excellent cooperation between our countries, the strong bond we have within our transatlantic partnership, and the fact that both countries can rely on each other.
Well, thank you very much. We'll now take a couple questions each. Reuters, Andrea, you got the first question.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Chancellor Scholz. Mr. President, I have wanted to ask you about this Nord Stream project that you've long opposed. You didn't mention it just now by name, nor did Chancellor Scholz. Did you receive assurances from Chancellor Scholz today that Germany will, in fact, pull the plug on this project if Russia invades Ukraine? And did you discuss what the definition of invasion could be? And then Chancellor Scholz, wenn ich Sie fragen darf,
if I may ask you, Chancellor Scholz, you said there was some strategic ambiguity that was needed in terms of sanctions. I just wanted to know whether the sanctions you are envisaging and the EU is working on, and the US as well, are already finished, finalized, or is there still work ongoing? And you're not really saying what the details are. Is that just an excuse for Germany maybe to not support the SWIFT measures?
Let me answer the first question first. If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
How will you do that exactly, since the project and control of the project is within Germany's control?
We will. I promise you, we'll be able to do it.
Thank you very much for your question. I want to be absolutely clear. We have intensively prepared everything to be ready with the necessary sanctions if there is a military aggression against Ukraine. And this is necessary. It is necessary that we do this in advance so that Russia can clearly understand that these are far-reaching, severe measures. It is part of this process that we do not spell out everything in public, because Russia could understand that there might be even more to come. And at the same time, it is very clear we are well prepared with far-reaching measures. We will take these measures together with our allies, with our partners, with the US, and we will take all necessary steps. You can be sure that there won't be any measures in which we have a differing approach. We will act together, jointly.
This is a good idea to say to our American friends, we will be united. We will act together. And we will take all the necessary steps, and all the necessary steps will be done by all of us together.
Will you commit today to turning off and pulling the plug on Nord Stream 2? You didn't mention it. You haven't mentioned it.
As I already said, we are acting together. We are absolutely united, and we will not taking different steps. We will do the same steps, and they will be very, very hard to Russia, and they should understand.
You recognize someone now, Chancellor?
Herr Fischer.
Ja. Michael Fischer, DPA, vielen Dank.
Michael Fischer, DPA. Mr. President, one question to you. The US, over the last few years, have exported heavy weapons to Ukraine, and Germany excludes that, has only delivered 5,000 helmets to Ukraine. Don't you think that NATO should act unanimously in this respect? And Germany, as the strongest European NATO partner, should also deliver heavy weapons to Ukraine. And Ukraine has asked Germany to do so. And on Nord Stream 2, I would also like to ask, don't you think with regard to the threat posed by Russia, Germany should already rethink its position on Nord Stream 2? And the third question, if I may, over the last few days and weeks, there has been severe criticism from the US media and from Congress as well vis-à-vis Germany about the reliability of Germany as an ally. This has been called into question. Do you understand this criticism? Is Germany a reliable partner from your point of view? And Mr. Chancellor, also a question to you, Nord Stream 2. You said all options are on the table. You're not mentioning Nord Stream 2 by name. Don't you think if you were to spell this out, you could win back trust as a strong ally here for the US?
There's no need to win back trust. He has the complete trust of the United States. Germany is one of our most important allies in the world. There is no doubt about Germany's partnership with the United States, none. With regard to helping Ukraine, one of the largest contributors financially to Ukraine has been Germany. Germany has been in the forefront of making sure of providing economic assistance. You also asked the question, you asked so many, I can't remember them all, but in terms of the U.S. media saying Germany is not reliable, Germany's completely reliable, completely, totally, thoroughly reliable. I have no doubt about Germany at all.
Wir sind eng verbunden mit den Vereinigten
We are united, and the transatlantic partnership between Germany and the US is one of the permanent pillars of German policy, and it will be relevant in the future as well, just as relevant. And this will be one of our top priorities always. On behalf of NATO, we are the country in continental Europe that is making the largest contribution, financial means and also military power. And we are the country that contributes a great share. We don't fully agree with the US, who pays the biggest part of financial support to Ukraine. So since 2014, about $2 billion direct bilateral support, and within the EU, an additional $3.8 billion that is made available. So substantial financial means to stabilize the Ukrainian economy, and we are willing to continue with that sort of contribution. So this is the very strong and unbreakable friendship between our two countries. Part of this is that with regard to the difficult situation at the Ukrainian border due to the Russian troops, we have made it very clear we will unanimously act in terms of sanctions. Mr. President, once again, a question with regard to arms exports. Do you think it is okay that NATO partners have different approaches here? And on Nord Stream 2, once again, do you think the current positioning of Germany with regard to the Russian threat is okay?
Look, there is no doubt in America's mind that Germany is an incredibly reliable ally and one of the leading physical powers in NATO, number one. Number two, the notion that Nord Stream 2 would go forward with an invasion by the Russians is just not going to happen. Now, Wall Street Journal, Sabrina?
Thank you, Mr. President. Based on everything you know now, do you think that President Putin will authorize an invasion of Ukraine before the end of the winter? And what is your message to the roughly 30,000 Americans who are currently in Ukraine? Do you think that they should leave the country?
Well, I've had numerous discussions with the Russians, and particularly with Putin. I don't know that he's even made it. I don't know that he knows what he's going to do. And I think he has to realize that it would be a gigantic mistake for him to move on Ukraine. The impact on Europe and the rest of the world would be devastating, and he would pay a heavy price. I have been very, very straightforward and blunt with President Putin, both on the phone and in person. We will impose the most severe sanctions that have ever been imposed, economic sanctions. And there will be a lot to pay for that down the road. It will affect others as well. It will affect us somewhat, it will affect Europeans, but it will have profound impact on his economy. And but I don't know. I know that he's in a position now to be able to invade, almost assuming that the ground is frozen above Kyiv. He has the capacity to do that. What he's going to do, I don't know. And I don't think anybody knows but him.
To the Americans who are currently in Ukraine, should they leave the country?
I think it'd be wise to leave the country. I'm not talking about our diplomatic corps. I'm talking about Americans who are there. I hate to see them get caught in a crossfire if, in fact, they did invade. And there's no need for that. And if I had anyone there, I'd say leave.
And to Chancellor Scholz, can you outline specific steps that Germany is taking to reduce its energy dependence on Russia? And what do you say to those who suggest that German reliance on Russian gas is limiting Europe's options for how to respond to the crisis in Ukraine?
Thank you very much for raising that question, because it gives me the opportunity to address a topic that's important to me. One good news, maybe, within its strategy on fighting man-made climate change, Germany has decided in a very short period of time to phase out of the use of oil and gas by very soon. And by 2045, Germany will have a carbon-neutral economy as one of the strongest economies of the world. And with regard to these energies, we often think about heating at home and driving a car, but we're talking about industrial production, producing steel, chemical substances, cement. And changing these industrial processes and reorganizing such systems is what we have planned. So this year we will continue to take far-reaching decisions that will help us to use more wind energy, offshore wind energy, onshore wind energy and solar energy, and expand the capacities, expand the grids, and have a strategy for Germany, but also worldwide, on the use of hydrogen, which is a central element for us to change our industrial processes that are using oil and gas right now. The industry is willing to be on board. We're doing this together with them, but it will probably be the biggest industrial modernization project in Germany in 100 years, with very good prospects that we will develop new technologies that other partners in the world can use as well. And this will help us fight climate change. And by the way, the energy mix today, we are talking about 1/4 of our energy that is linked to gas, and only part of that gas comes from Russia. A big part comes from Norway or the Netherlands. And of course, it is very important to us that we develop an infrastructure that will give us the opportunity to have all options available and react if needed. So you don't have to be concerned. There are some who should be concerned, who see themselves maybe too much as a deliverer of such resources. Because we are focusing on renewable energies, we will go down that path and make sure that this is the profitable future.
And if you're just joining us, that was the joint press conference between U.S. President Joe Biden and the new German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, their first press conference. And the world waiting, of course, to hear what both leaders are going to say. They did say there's no doubt about trust between both countries, reliable partners. But Michaela Kuffner, one president says he knows what to do about Nord Stream 2 in the event of an invasion. The chancellor was, what would you say, more nuanced, more reluctant?
He still can't bring himself to say it.
He can't say Nord Stream 2.
He cannot bring himself to say that Nord Stream 2 will be not going into service if Russia invades Ukraine again. And that is quite something, because Joe Biden said it twice. The US president stood right next to him and did say it twice.
I mean, explain that from the point of view of the German chancellor. The US president has just said, we will shut down Nord Stream 2.
Yeah,
which is a German project.
And the Germans would have to do it. That's the whole point. It would need German participation. And the answer from Olaf Scholz is, whatever we do, we will do together. Everything is on the table. But he simply cannot repeat that. And I think it's quite stunning. And this also explains, actually, why there is so much criticism on the American side that he doesn't spell it out. He doesn't clearly say it. And the only explanation is that this basically is pressure he's getting from his own party, not to create that conditionality, not to ruffle feathers with that direct threat in Moscow. But clearly, as a NATO ally, as a close ally of the United States, that is exactly what will happen, because US President Joe Biden just said he would make sure it happens. So this really was quite something to watch.
You say something to watch. I mean, was this? I mean, it seems negative. I mean, I'm imagining when Chancellor Scholz gets back to Germany, that he's going to be taken to task for not being able to say that we would shut down Nord Stream 2, while the US president says that.
A lot of what he said, particularly also on Nord Stream 2, are sentences that I have heard from him almost word by word before. So he has not changed his rhetoric. So both leaders spoke about this. There is a contract, basically, between the two countries that if Russia uses energy as a strategic weapon, that pipeline would not go online. And yet he still won't actually, he wouldn't label it a strategic leverage, as the United States has done in the past. He actually rolled back from a definition that Angela Merkel took years to come around to, that there actually is a political element to Nord Stream 2, which she wouldn't say for many years. She would claim it's strictly business. Yeah. And this is what he reverted back to in the early days, and we're only on day 62, of his chancellorship. Yeah. And now he's standing right next to the US president, who's actually time gone on the record, but now standing right next to him saying that. So it's quite spectacular. And it shows, actually, the difference, not just in communication, but also in intent when it comes to the fine details of what is a common stance.
So do you think, though, that before they came out to do this press conference, did they discuss, obviously they knew they were going to be asked this question, did they discuss then what will be our answer?
Look, I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall in there, but having watched them both go on the record and face the press, whatever they discussed, they didn't agree it enough.
That's what it seems like.
Yeah,
that's what it seems like.
This was not agreed well enough. This was not choreographed.
Let me ask our producer, can we go to Washington to our correspondent Oliver Salet? Do we have Oliver? Oliver, do we have you? Yeah, we're trying to pull at that because, I mean, we want to ask.
You have me here.
Okay, very good. Let me just ask you, maybe we can pull you in. At any moment, we'll have your picture. Let's see if they could change those cameras for us. There you are. Okay. That's not exactly what we were thinking about, but
and I've been listening to you very interestedly.
We can see you. What do you make of this this press conference and the fact of what we were just talking about? The U.S. president saying, yes, we will shut down Nord Stream 2, and Chancellor Scholz saying, yeah, we will act in unity.
Yeah, it's remarkable, isn't it, Brent? Just a few years ago, we were actually talking about the question whether the U.S. is still a reliable partner when the occupant of the White House was a different one.
That's
now,
right.
A few years down the line, we're sitting here, we're talking about, is Germany a reliable partner? I was just wondering what is happening here, and President Biden really had to defend his partner here, Olaf Scholz, against those questions of the journalists, saying that, of course, Germany has all the trust it needs from the U.S. But that was quite remarkable. And then, of course, with that really pressing question, and there was a lot of pressure mounting on Olaf Scholz's shoulders when he came here, the question of Nord Stream 2, Biden saying something that he actually can't say, that, of course, there will be no Nord Stream 2 if Russia invades Ukraine, and then Olaf Scholz really trying to avoid, to give a clear answer on that. And I think that was actually the kind of Olaf Scholz we have known before. I would have not expected him to stay as wobbly on that topic, but he did so, and I think he stayed behind the expectations here, really.
And what do you think is going to be the fallout from that tonight and tomorrow, particularly there in Washington?
Yeah, I mean, in Washington, we already had the German ambassador, Emily Haber, wiring a cable to Berlin warning of that fallout and that the U.S., that Germany would lose a lot of reputation here in the United States. And although we didn't hear that, Biden was very protective. That is already happening, of course, when we look at Congress right now. And Congress, as we speak, is debating and putting together a proposal package for sanctions, and the Republicans are very serious on putting sanctions on Nord Stream 2, even without Russia invading Ukraine. So that will be very interesting to follow. And of course, it's been here on the news, on the headlines of the daily newspapers here in the U.S., that question that journalists carried into the White House today, if Germany is still a reliable partner. And I think the German Chancellor did nothing to improve that image.
Yeah, it's interesting, Oliver. Thank you. And let's talk about something else that came up, and that was Article 5, Michaela. And Biden saying that we are united behind Article 5. And that's also been something that's been in question lately.
Absolutely, but this is clearly aimed at the Baltics and particularly countries like Poland, who are very concerned right now that Russia will develop even more of an appetite for what Vladimir Putin considers a balance, a new balance in Europe. But I just want to come back to what you just discussed, because it's almost like you have a high-level visit and Olaf Scholz came without a gift. He came without really something to say. And I'm just looking at the wires here because there was nothing I heard was really new in what he said. It did not deliver a new quality of alliance. It was stressing his existing position. Now, you can argue, OK, because there is nothing new about the position. But at such a high-level meeting, there is something you want to announce. And they didn't announce anything. And he didn't deliver the goods that everybody was expecting were the minimum, which was the commitment to Nord Stream 2.
I've got 1 minute here. Yeah. So considering all that, Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, next week goes to Russia and Ukraine. Will he be going because of this with, a weaker Chancellor?
Well, he's certainly not going as a stronger Chancellor. And after the praise we saw Vladimir Putin heap on Emmanuel Macron, the French president, today, clearly he is perceived by Putin, deliberately so, I would say, as the current leader of Europe. And Ukraine simply is angry at Germany for not delivering weapons, because they also want to see the symbolism of that from Germany.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I've been told we've got 30 seconds more. What's going to be the reaction, though, here in Germany tomorrow because of what was said and what was not said now in Washington?
I think he is not coming back with flying colours from this press conference.
Yeah. I asked you, do you think he was going to be shredded by the German media tomorrow?
Potentially, yes.
Yeah. Our chief political editor, Michaela Kuffner. Michaela, as always, it's good talking with you, having you here at the big table. Let's have a reminder of the top stories that we've been covering for you as part of our live coverage at a press conference after their first meeting between the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and the U.S. President Joe Biden. Both leaders promising that in the event of a Russian invasion, that we would see to it, the U.S. President saying we would see to it that the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline would be shut down. The German Chancellor made no such promise, but said the two countries are aligned on potential sanctions. You're watching DW News from Berlin. This has been our live coverage of that first joint press conference between the U.S. President and the German Chancellor. I'll be back at the top of the hour with more world news, followed by the day. Our coverage of this meeting at the
One of mankind's oldest ambitions could be within reach. What if it really is possible to reverse aging? Research